Right.
Okay, all right, sounds good.
You're so generous. Thank you.
Okay, we will call the meeting to order. The first item up is the adoption of the agenda.
Move to approve.
Second. Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right, we will go around the horn. Reverend Mack?
Yes.
You, Ms. Coates?
Yes.
Reverend Collins?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Frazier? Aye. I vote yes. Ms. Green? Mr. Hollenshed is not available, and Ms. Jeffrey?
Yes.
All right. Item is the review of online public comments that we had in our file. Are there any questions?
I just hope that during the Safe Start plan, there are a number of questions about remote to virtual at different, if we make sure we cover that, that would be helpful.
Okay. The next item up is number 3, the Strategic Ed Committee. Ms. Jeffrey, I would typically turn this over to you. Do you want me to keep going with it?
Yeah, because, yes, please.
Okay, just for the facility of, it's tough on Zoom.
Yeah.
The
go
first item up is the Safe School Restart Plan update.
Thank you, Mr. Garrett. While we're waiting for the first slide to load, here we go. Is the same introduction slide that the board saw in July at the committee of the whole meeting and the board approval meeting on the 27th, but the slides behind it are not the same, just to be clear. Into slide deck, we're talking about 5 different areas. First, we'll recap what we did in July. Second, we're going to give you information about the responses from the parent enrollment choice form and the instructional staff survey. Third, we're going to share the COVID-19 trend review, which is what you asked for today. Fourth, we'll talk about the school capacities. And fifth, we will just have one slide that summarizes all of that. And then when I'm finished with that part, item 3B will turn over to learning services. And it's in learning services that several of the questions about the virtual academy will be addressed in more detail. So to get started, I'm not sure if Maggie's having difficulty loading the slides or not. Erica, can you see if Maggie's having difficulty? Thank you. Thanks. In the first part on the recap, we're just going to review the requirements, the board action, and next steps. So just to remind everyone, these were the required plan components that we received from the State Department on Friday, July 17th. All districts, in order to have our plan approved, were to include in the plan an in-person option for all students. If the rate is too high, the COVID rate is too high in a particular district, that district can make a decision to delay an in-person start as long as you include information about precisely when you'll start or how you'll make that decision. Secondly, we needed to provide a option for all students. The third was the time frame for working toward all in-person. Fourth is to show how high quality instruction will be provided. That means students with special needs are to be served. Every student with any special instructional need, and for us, that would be all students need to be served. And then finally, this didn't come from the State Department, it's a legislative requirement that we offer 5 additional days beyond the traditional 180 days of instruction for students in pre-K through the 8th grade. So those were the parameters within which we were working. This is a copy of the board motion from July 27th. In-person school will begin September 8th with actual in-person instruction, subject to a downward reduction in COVID-19 infection rates, or temporary stay-at-home remote instruction if parents prefer to start the school year in that mode. So we talked about the virtual academy, and Ms. Belcher and her staff will say a little bit more about what we've learned, what we're thinking about the virtual option And then next, we had the requirement that all any kind of remote instruction has to start with an in-person meeting. That comes from a State Department requirement. In-person student presence at school may occur for parents and teachers who are comfortable with this option. And in the July meeting, the board indicated that you don't expect that to exceed 20 to 25% of the normal school capacity. You reiterated that we had to see a downward trend for at least a 14-day period and that we would review the trend today. So the next steps, we put in gray font some of this slide because we're on track with those items. By mid-August, that's almost where we are. We'll try to finalize the individual school enrollment for those students who are going to be taught virtually. We might not say it's a virtual academy. We want to make sure that students who want to be taught virtually by the teachers in their home school have that option if that's possible. At any rate, we'll try to get the parent preferences, the student plans, the building capacity, all that together in the next week so that parents know, hopefully by August 19th, what we'll be able to do to accommodate their children. Between the 19th and the 8th, we'll help families prepare for the virtual instruction or their in-school option. And then the week of August 31st, again, we'll invite the K-8 students a few at a time into school to meet their teacher, assess their needs, review how to use the devices, go through the protocols for when they're in the building. So these are called LEAP, learning, evaluating, analyzing, and preparing. They're optional for our teachers and instructional staff who are on 190-day contracts. If they choose to come to work that week, they will receive their regular salary, but they're not required to work that week if they prefer not to. So we move on then to what we found out when we asked parents to take their choices. Survey that might not have been as straightforward as it could be if we were rerunning it today, knowing what we know now. But last week, when we got the survey results from parents last Wednesday, over 60% of the parents indicated, over 60% of the parents responded to the survey. 64% want in-person instruction, 35% want virtual instruction, and at that time, 1% indicated they don't plan to enroll their children in Charleston County this year. So what's happening now is that principals will get with teachers and other staff, starting to reach out to all the parents to make sure they clearly understand what their options may be and start the process of scheduling. Of the parents who responded, about 37% wanted bus transportation. So we have to keep in mind that 40% of parents didn't respond, and there may be more parents in that portion of our student population who want transportation than not. But if we transporting only a small portion of our students, we're going to have to stagger the start times because we don't have enough stacking space for all the cars. So we'll have to phase in the morning every 10 minutes or for the arrival so that the cars don't back up when we get back to full operation. So the next slide, we talk about the instructional staff survey summary. I just want to take a little bit of time to explain about the teachers. So 3,167 actual teachers were listed on our rolls as of July 29th. And we're at this time of the year signing on more teachers every week, but that's how many actual teachers. Teachers include the classroom teachers, librarians, guidance counselors, and instructional coaches are in that category. The survey was sent to instructional personnel. So that included paraprofessionals and some school leaders who weren't on contract as of July 29th. So of the instructional personnel who responded to the survey, 85% indicated that if COVID-19 rates continue to decline, they're willing to return to school to teach smaller groups of students in person. 14% are absolutely not comfortable returning to teach students at this time, and 1% indicate they have medical conditions that would prevent them from being able to return safely. When we look at the staff who indicated they would they want to work the extra days on August 31st to September 4th. That 85% rate still holds true. These were two separate surveys. Again, these are for the LEAP days, learn, evaluate, analyze, prepare. They're for grades pre-K through 8, a few students at a time. The state's going to cover the cost of salary. So the separate survey asking our employees who wish to work that week, 85% indicate they plan to work. And in PK8, there are 2,329 instructional staff members. When we cut the survey information off together, data for this presentation, 1,971 indicated that they plan to work the week of August 31st. So in that count, we don't have the information from teachers who teach 6-8 in schools like Baptist Hill Military Magnet School of the Arts, because it wasn't possible to extract that information from PowerPoint at that separate from the rest of the teachers. So that's what we know about those who plan to return to work the week of August 31st. So the third part of our presentation this evening, we want to revisit the trend date as you asked us to do. Your motions must see a downward trend in COVID-19 rates over a 14-day period. On August 5th, our local DHEC indicated that Charleston County has been on a downward trajectory of 19 cases for 21 plus days, and that these are promising signs. We want, though, to look at two different indicators. One is our incidence rate. As of July 19th, our 14-day incident rate was 880 cases of COVID per 100,000 residents. As of August 8th, the 14-day incident rate was 414 cases per 100,000 residents. So we've dropped a little over 50% during the past 3 weeks, but we would need to see a continuing decline. So we believe that people wearing masks, watching their personal hygiene, and watching their distance is definitely having an impact. We appreciate everything that everybody is doing to help us be able to return more students to in-person instruction. So if we look here in Charleston County, this is what our COVID-19 14-day incidence trend looks like. You can see the line as it's graphed there. We are still above the DHEC recommended rate to bring all children back in person. We're well above that recommended number that DHEC publishes. Statewide, the COVID-19 testing positivity rate is declining slowly, but it's up and down across the state. So we just wanted to point out that this is a challenge for us. The testing availability, the ease of accessing the tests, and the lagging turnaround time for the test results make it hard for us to have the kind of real-time data that ideally all of us, everyone would like to have to make informed decisions. The safe restart school enrollment capacity is something we said we would talk about tonight. Jeff Baroe and his team have done a tremendous amount of work along with principals. So I'm going to turn this part of the program over to Jeff Baroe.
Thanks, Dr. Postlewaite. Before I show the slides that have our capacity numbers on them, I really want to make sure that everybody understands the overall development of these numbers so that we don't jump to the wrong conclusions. We've got two types of data on the subsequent slides. One is the normal capacity, and the other is part of our COVID analysis. The normal capacity is what we've used regularly. We've submitted a report. We submitted a report in the spring of this year that talked about how that number was calculated. It's not maximum capacity. It's not the total number of kids we could push into a school. It is a normal operating capacity, and it's done in two ways between elementary and middle and high. Elementary school, we use an average of 22 students per teaching station. We don't include the fine arts room. That 22 comes from the average of the number of kids that are permitted in class per the district guidelines. The COVID analysis, this isn't the number of kids we can send back to school right now. It's not necessarily the number of kids we can send back to school in September or October, but it was an analysis based on providing 6-foot spacing or dividers between children. And so what you'll see on the subsequent slides, and in some cases, our COVID capacity or the capacity we use using 6-foot spacing or dividers is actually higher than the normal building capacity. That's expected. It's based on how each number is calculated. And in this case, some schools also use their fine arts room to count as classrooms. And so there will be differences between schools because of the use of some of those spaces. Principals had the ability to do that. And in some cases, the classroom size was restrictive. And you'll see that in some numbers, it would be lower than another comparable school. And it's because their classroom sizes, it may be an older school and their sizes are lower. So if we can move on, I'll very quickly go through some of these slides. There's 3 slides on elementary schools. And what you'll see on the elementary slides is that most of them can accommodate the full enrollment if we were okay with 6-foot spacing or dividers in place. Where I've got listed TBDs, there's some differences going on with those. Bell Hall on this slide is because it's under construction. We're in the middle of a huge renovation project out there, and we don't have the number for Bell Hall yet. So if we go to the next slide, this is the second elementary slide. You'll see an asterisk by James B. Edwards, and there's an asterisk by Whitesides on a slide coming down. That asterisk is because we have some furniture swap out going, and so that number may change. Julian Mitchell's TBD, they're going to the old Camp Road School. The Camp Road School has plenty of capacity, so we expect that number to be solid when we end up calculating it. Next slide, elementary school. This is where we start to see some of our Montessori's. Montessori's been a challenge. We're trying to accommodate the learning style that Montessori uses. There is a different furniture arrangement in the Montessori schools, and so finding the right space and also trying to maximize the ability for those schools to teach as they normally do has prevented us from coming up with a final number for the Montessori schools at this juncture. Next slide is if you want to keep going, that one is elementary schools all filled in. Moving on to the middle schools. Middle schools is where some of the classroom sizes kick in, so you'll see some differences in capacity. And this is where we also start to face the high school type desks in some of our schools. These are the desk top chair combos, and finding a suitable divider that everybody is satisfied with has been a challenge. And so we have some of these schools as TBDs because we're working through that configuration for what they're typically used for the high school desks, tables and chairs. And we've also got, as I mentioned earlier, smaller class sizes in some of our schools here. Moving on to the high schools. High schools, about 5 or 6 of them are yet to be completed. Those are being worked through, again, similar to middle schools where we've got the high school style desks. That's been a challenge to come up with the number. We were hoping to have this completed by last Friday. We're working it into this week. That hasn't slowed down divider installation, which began in the elementary schools and is moving forward. But we'll continue to press through this and hope to have a solid number by the end of the week. I think that's the last slide, Dr. Postaway. Yep.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yes, ma'am.
We can revisit those slides as board members want to, but you can see we have a lot of work to do to calculate those numbers. What we want to say about instructional planning is that a whole lot more planning is occurring at the schools this week. There is a back to school video that Reverend Mack and other board members requested. It's available on YouTube. We will like it to all households in the coming week. The pictures that you've seen in this slide presentation tonight are clipped, primarily are clipped from that video. When we finish any questions you have about this section, we'll move on to item 3B, which includes the instructional division's updates on the particulars regarding academic thing. So, Mr. Garrett?
I'll go around the horn with questions on the plan, and then I've got one on it. Go ahead, Ms. Coates.
Fine.
Ms. Frazier?
Just real quick, looking at MUSC's numbers, I know there is the downward trend, but the total amount of infections in the community per 10,000 or 100,000 is still in the red zone.
Mm-hmm.
What color number are we looking for? 10%, 5%? Because I think we're around 13 to 15 right now. When is it the trigger is going to be so that people understand when capacities will change?
Yeah, people are wanting a specific number. And I think what we have to say is that there are a lot of different factors. So each family can look at the data that are available online and make their own decision about when they think it is right for their child to phase back in. We actually have one more slide, which is a summary slide, and it indicates that for us, we wanted to see at least a 50% decline before we thought about bringing anyone back. And so as we look at what we think about then are the trend rates in our community, the schools, facilities' ability to create and maintain the right safe spacing and enforce the protocols. So we develop a culture of compliance. Our teachers' willingness to come back, given the conditions, and then parents' preference. So what Learning Services is going to talk about is a plan where we're going to guarantee virtual for people as long as they feel they need it for this year, but also try to create a much more fluid and flexible, make it easier for people to transition back as they feel it's safe. We're not recommending starting with an AABB schedule because that exposes twice as many children to the school environment. I'm not answering your question other than to say we think it's safe enough to start back with children in some sites. We believe that. We're here. We'll be out in schools tomorrow, and we'll be out in schools with children when they start back. But in the final analysis, that's a decision everyone's going to have to make. What we wanted to see was at least a 50% decline from where we were, and we'll watch anytime we begin to head in the wrong direction, we may have to switch pretty quickly from in-person to virtual. Ultimately, it's the board's call.
And when we have a dashboard on the website or something that provides people the 5 or 6 things that you just talked about so that they have in real time the ability to assess that information?
We're talking, there will be a dashboard. We're talking about what all ought to be on that dashboard, and it'll either be our dashboard. In some instances, there will be links to other agencies' dashboards so that we're not repeating data that we're not qualified to interpret.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Just one question. I know that this survey result is as of August 5th with the 60% of the parents responding. So I guess my question is there another set of surveys that will be done, or is there an opportunity for us, or is there plans of reaching out to these other 40% that did not respond to try to get a more generalized count of where we will be as far as who wants in-person transportation and so forth down the line?
Yes, sir. I think we're finished with surveying. It's time now for principals and teachers to take this over and reach out to parents for decisions. Who wants to come back? Who's ready to come back now? Do we have more parents who want to send their children back than we have capacity? And how do we prioritize? Who wants, who knows that they want their child in virtual learning for a while? Are you thinking long-term for the entire year or the first 9 weeks? And then let's start pairing up teachers and children so that the classes that come back in person are a little smaller, somewhat smaller. They would have been. I don't know if that's 50% or 75% of what they would have been. And then we can balance out with the teachers who are teaching virtually may be able to handle a few students, 2 or 3 more students, the in-person lower. So what happens next is from the school level, there are no more surveys. It's due or not due at this point.
So then is it safe to say then that once this get to the school level, that teachers will be going according to their roster to those parents that have not responded?
Parents are making some decisions about the best way to get that done, whether that's something that someone else can do so that teachers aren't tied up with that, because we have a staff who may be available to help with that. It would be our preference that teachers don't have to sit and go down their own rosters.
Got it.
I have a question. Oh, sorry, when you're done.
Now, excuse me, Ms. Jeffrey, I was just saying one wants to be careful about answering for 80 some different leaders across the district. It could be that some school decides the best way to handle this is that teachers would make the calls, but
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes, Ms. Jeffrey, go ahead, please.
And I don't know if this is for Mr. Burroway or the superintendent, but we got an email today of a teacher who went into a school and some people were not following safety protocol. I know there aren't kids in the school, but we were worried about the adults too. Who is there to make sure that even our contract employees are wearing masks and staying distant?
that's probably both for Mr. Burrowey and me. Fortunately, that employee followed the protocol and reported to her supervisor last week, who was then able to start the process. The principal understands what the principal should have done. The employee mentioned 2 different schools. Things were pretty much on target in one school, not as on target as they should have been in the other school, which has a new principal. So we are responsible in our learning services and personnel offices to make sure that we have a culture of compliance and that principals understand they are the captain of the ship. It's their responsibility to see that everyone is in compliance at all times. And then as far as contracted employees go, we have a process for that that Mr. Burrowey should address.
To piggyback on what Dr. Postlewaite said, the captain is still the captain of the principal, is still the captain of the ship, even with contractors in the school. So I'm fully expecting principals to say something to those individuals and take it up with them. They always have an open door with me and with Mr. Kromps to talk about non-compliance, and we could take that up from a contract perspective. I'm hoping that by doing that in both directions, we can maintain compliance. As you see anywhere out in town where folks are supposed to be wearing masks, they might not always wear them, and so we're going to beat that. We're going to be better than that. It's a matter of changing that culture and getting on board with it before our children get back in school.
I just thought that was important for the public to hear.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Ms. Darby?
So I have 2 questions, and if this first question is going to be addressed in your next presentation, just tell me, Ms. Kutcher. But as people have asked us what exactly we're offering, my understanding is we're offering virtual academy, so 9 weeks for middle schoolers and elementary at least, and a commitment for high schoolers for a semester, and then in-school option, and then a little bit of a hybrid as we get started in case the numbers hiccup a little bit. But I've seen some requests from parents that they want virtual, but they want their child's teacher for all year long, their child's teacher from their own school. But my understanding was that if you're doing virtual academy, it might not necessarily be with all of the kids from your home school. Am I wrong on that?
No, ma'am, you're not. And Ms. Belcher will say, but I will just say this very quickly. As we learn more from teachers and parents, we want to modify where we can to try to be as thoughtful in responding as we can be. So at the high school, if 1/3 of your children decide to sign up for virtual, we have to reduce your staff, and with certification so carefully regulated, we may pull away the teacher to teach in virtual, whom you have to teach another course. So to the extent we can let the virtual options be offered at the school level, we want to try to do that. And I think Ms. Belcher will address that more.
All right, I just wanted to make sure I know that's a stupid question because I know you're not. Okay, my other question is looking at this summary slide, if the trend improves, all of those things, and school capacity is what it is, the staff is ready, and more parents, if we have more parents come back, let's say at our August 20 meeting, as we're talking about for September 8th, can we expand that 25% capacity? We don't.
Yes, ma'am. After the questions are finished, we wanted to put the summary slide up and just say, here's where we think we are when we hand that off to Ms. Belcher. But we believe that in some schools, we may not have 25% of the children coming back, but in other schools like Jane Edwards, It was already, the student enrollment was so low, given the capacity building, that if all the staff were willing to come back, we probably could serve all students in that school, which is still fewer than 100 students. So we wanted to be clear about that with the board before we close out my section.
Okay, thank you.
I've got a couple questions on that capacity. If I know that the survey is not 100%, but it's at least if you extrapolate that over our 50,000 students, you expect that roughly 32,000 want to come back to school. And it looks like using the capacity with 6-foot spacing and dividers, we would be able to accommodate most of those who would want to, and particularly at most schools. But if you use the 25%, then we're going to have 20,000 kids who are sitting at home and don't want to be, nor do their parents want to be, because they can't work. What is the deciding factor between those? Those are, 20,000 families across the district, either affected or not, based on which capacity.
That's precisely the question we wanted to ask the board tonight. If it turns out that we can create the conditions that are safe, if COVID-19 rates continue to decline, if personnel are willing to come back, might we go ahead and plan to bring back more students so that we can serve more students?
Okay.
In one classroom without doing AABB, because that exposes one classroom environment to 2 different students. It's safer to bring more back on a 5-day schedule, we think, than to have a hybrid. And we think it's instructionally much more sound. Ms. Belcher will probably speak to that as well.
And then my follow-up to that then is, if the will of the board is to go with the 25% capacity, where we're going to have excess capacity is in staff. So as parents like me who will choose to go private versus virtual for at least one of my children, that's going to reduce the numbers. It's also going to reduce the number of dollars we get as a budget. Are we planning for that? And do we have what for the budgeting that'll go along, and the reduced staff capacity, I would say?
Right, so the fewer students we have enrolled, the less state revenue we receive, the less federal revenue we receive, and the fewer staff we would need to hire. We wouldn't have the revenue to do it, and there wouldn't be a need to do it, and that's the fallout that we'll have to look at on the, there are 2 counts. Don, you want to speak to the 2 different days where the official enrollment counts are taken?
Well, so as you know, we have the 7-day enrollment adjustments each fall. And so we would do that currently on December the 16th if we have enough data. We're not sure yet whether we would have enough data for then. So my staff and I talked on maybe an additional enrollment adjustment. My understanding right now is that even if we lose teachers, move it a little bit closer so I can hear you. My understanding right now is that even if we lose teachers, that the available teacher pool is very low. So there's not as many teachers that are willing to come in. And so the first time that we have an opportunity to make an adjustment with the state, I think would be different than this year than previous years, because the state has not adopted a budget yet. So we will bring to the board a revised fiscal year 21 budget. At that time, we will have more details on what the numbers look like. And the next time that we have an opportunity to understand what the state revenues would be the 45-day count number that we report to the state. And then our final adjustment won't be until the 135th day number, which will be next.
But to answer your question, worst case scenario is we may have to furlough employees. We would hope not to do that.
Right.
And we would definitely have to adjust for this coming year.
Okay.
Virtual counts as a student in attendance, however.
Virtual does count as a student for the
Yeah.
parents who can tolerate virtual.
Go ahead, Ms. Coates.
Sure. So we've done the surveys and we've got about 65% response rate. And then we spent a lot of time talking about how we're going to find the other 40%. Have the 60% that responded, is that a commitment, or are they going to be contacted as well?
Everyone will be contacted. It was just enrollment options. We asked people at the end of July, the beginning of August, to make a call on something that they didn't have nearly enough information about, either from us or with respect to the data. So our goal would be to try to open with some percentage of students in a fairly stable 5-day-week population. But when an outbreak occurs, if wants to move to virtual, we'd like to make that a fluid process. And if someone is virtual and believes they'd like to come back into school, as quickly as we can accommodate that with teaching capacity, following safety guidelines, we want to do that. So we think Ms. Belcher and her team believe that we can make that more fluid than we originally envisioned it.
But for parents who have filled out surveys or on social media and who are thinking that they don't know what's their next step, every parent is going to get asked this by their individual school staff to some extent.
We
So
do
until the
not
school calls the parents and
excuse me.
students, they still have that option.
Right.
obtain
I'm
it.
not saying every parent will get a call, but there's an enrollment, an official registration process that has not occurred yet in all schools. Some schools have actually started it.
I know that you are trying to be as judicious as possible, but do we have a disciplinary protocol for non-compliance? I mean,
Yes,
we're
ma'am.
educators, but we're employers. And it seems to me that the basis of safe working conditions ought to be a condition of employment, ought to be something that you rectify through your role as employers. Other
Agreed.
than these culture, I like the
Agreed.
culture, I like all of the getting them used to and everything, but at some point, we're the employers.
Agreed. I'll tell you, in our offices, what happens is if you walk by without a mask, if you're outside if someone's in your office with you, you need to have a mask on. If you're outside your office, you need to have a mask on. If you're outside your office without a mask and we see you, there's a letter to you by the end of the day, a gentle reminder. If we have to do that more than once, we cannot put
And
down what we're
including-
doing and deal with it. So it is a pretty much non-negotiable. We just don't have a lot of time to counsel adults about what needs to be done. And we regret the fact that a teacher who was willing to come back into the environment came back last week and didn't feel really confident. So we're glad to know that, and hopefully we'll have corrected that before a whole lot more teachers come back into the environment tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you,
Ms.
Todd.
Frazier?
Just an observation, I think you're going to clear it up. The survey was somewhat limiting in terms of people's choice because there was not a lot of understanding of in-person could also be remote. So I think
We agree.
it was either this or that, and that really wasn't the choice. And so we kind of had a little fool's errand there where we didn't create a good environment. So hopefully we can do a better explanation of that.
We agree. We were dealing with the July 17th directive
Understood.
at that
Yeah,
time.
I get
And things keep developing. We appreciate the grace that people are showing us in a very frustrating situation for them,
For everybody.
for everyone.
Reverend Mack?
Yeah, this item is actually listed as action/information. So if there's no further question, I actually want to pose an action item.
Okay,
I like to have a word.
okay. Reverend Collins, I will get after this. Thank you. Go ahead.
So I know we've been talking about, just say this before I propose it, about the 25% capacity. Yeah. So I think as we begin to move forward with this, I like to propose that we allow staff to have the flexibility to do the percentage increases where it is deemed safe and necessary in schools that can provide the actual spaces for the increase in in-person attendance.
Second. All right, so the motion to allow more flexibility for staff to increase that capacity as you deem safe then.
Safe, yes.
And we've got a second on that. I will go to Reverend Collins for the discussion or have a question, Reverend Collins.
Yeah, the chance to weigh in. Just remember, we are still out here virtual, so don't forget about us. And maybe you ought to give us priority. Dr. Postlewaite, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so on the parent enrollment option form, says about 30,000 people responded to it. And I think it's 63%, almost 64% said they prefer in person of that 30,000. So
64.
when I do the math on that, I figure that comes to about other people's surveys, maybe about 57%, 56% or so, what it really breaks down to of all the ones surveyed for the in-person. So what are we telling the people that did the survey? That are we telling them? I see the options on here. Are we mentioning anything about the temporary virtual? Was that an option, or was just in person, or just the virtual AABB days? Can you kind of give a little more the details of that? But I don't see where it's anything about the temporary virtual.
Yes, sir, I can. The more detailed slides were in the booklet where we broke it down. If you wanted in person, the survey was not clear to people who didn't already know what we were talking about. And it was intended to find out how many parents are interested in sending their children back in person as soon as possible, and how many know now that they want virtual for a while because they're not comfortable with the current COVID outbreak. So underneath the in-person option, there was the opportunity to check a box that said, if 5 days a week isn't possible, I would be comfortable with an AABB schedule, alternating days. There was a chance to say, I understand if in-person isn't possible, I can virtual for a little while. And there was an opportunity to indicate if you needed a bus transportation, if you planned to come back. That detail breakdown is in the board document. But
I have it here, but I don't see that. I don't see that part you're speaking about the temporary virtual. In fact, I didn't realize that we had temporary virtual and actual virtual, but that's a difference. But the virtual is the one that calls for the high school kids one's full semester commitment. But the temporary virtual doesn't call for that. That the kids can return anytime that the staff deem it safe. So what I'm asking you is was a temporary virtual option considered in the parent survey?
What it was, Reverend Collins, and I think to your point, the really important thing is moving forward as parents now get ready to register, that they all understand that if they want to send their children back for virtual instruction connected with their own child's school, they can do that. And we will try, learning services and principals, teachers will try their best to accommodate your children on a virtual schedule taught by teachers predominantly by teachers at your school, if that's what you would like. And if that wasn't clear in the survey, it will be clear when parents are now given the actual choices that they have to register their child. Does that
yes, well, not so much for me, but just that when you learn that the virtual calls for a one semester commitment minimum for high school and a minimum of 9 weeks for middle and elementary kids, sometimes when the parents have that commitment, they're a little bit afraid to commit to being out of school that long, to being at home that long with kids. So what I'm getting at is that maybe the language may be driving up the numbers higher than what they really are for the children, for the parents that really want to send their kids to school. They may not, because I haven't had very many parents tell me, in fact, none say, well, I want my child to go back to school in person yet. So, but when you consider the virtual side of it, there's some one semester commitment, and that's a different story. Then they're more willing to try to take the risk of sending the kids to school early. But enough on that. One other thing I want to ask you, then I'll move on. The teacher survey, I assume it's teachers. It says the total number of responses, instructional staff. Is that teachers only, or is that principals and other people? Is that teachers only?
No, it showed it in the,
I have it here. I'm asking you, is that teachers only, or that other people that involved with teaching?
It's predominantly teachers. There were also some paraprofessionals in that survey, and there could have been some school leadership, assistant principals, for example, who were on contract during the summer. It was predominantly teachers.
So so the question was, if the numbers continue to drop about September 8th, are they willing to return to school in small group settings? And Chris Fraser spoke up a little while ago. He went first asking about the numbers. What do we deem a safe number? And you decided that 50% of cases, to be 50% less than where we are now. Or I think that's what you stated or implied, about half where we are now. So if the numbers today are 15%, 16%, 18, they've been high as 21% in Charleston County and throughout the state. So are we looking for a realistic number? Who's going to make that determination that now is safe for kids to go back to school? I mean, should be less than 5%? Or should we say, well, DHEC's going to decide, or the governor's going to decide, or the hospital's going to decide? Who's going to decide what's a safe number for all children, or even more than 25% to return back to school? How is that decision going to be made?
Just one slight friendly amendment to what you just talked about, a 50% reduction between July 8th, when we first looked at that, and today. What we just internally we would have to see before we move forward. Your other question about who decides, if at this point in time, it's a local district's decision, I would suggest to you, given where we are, it has to be an individual decision. The parent has to decide for children, and in the final analysis right now, each one of our employees needs to decide whether he or she is comfortable coming before children in person and working with children in person. The purpose of the survey was not to ask personnel to commit, it was to find out what they are thinking. And we know that among pre-K through 8 employees, 85% have said they definitely want to come August 31st to work with children in small groups, to meet with a few children at a time. So we'll see where we are. In the final analysis, teachers and other staff members have to make the decision, and we will work with them just as professionally and as we possibly can, knowing that we have children who need to be served. But we're trying in the situation that we're in to let individuals make decisions based on the information that they have at the time.
Okay, someone else will go ahead.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got a motion on the table. Second.
Can I ask what is?
Yeah, please.
What is the motion? It says to allow them flexibility to do what?
So currently, I think currently the proposal is the range of 20 to 25%.
I thought that was an understanding. Embedded in our motion?
So what I'm saying is that there are some schools that can actually hold more than that percentage. So what I'm saying is that we allow staff the flexibility to be able to make that adjustment as long as it's safe to do so, given that there's a greater interest of returning back to in-person classroom instruction.
And I understand that, but was it embedded that limited you to 25%
Your
in the motion?
Your motion actually said not expected to exceed. So it
Okay.
didn't exactly limit.
You're
but-
asking that we just simply kind of remove that expectation. That's your motion, is to remove the expectation that we set a percentage of kids in the building.
And allow the flexibility, staff to have that flexibility.
That makes a lot of sense.
Okay. The only question I would ask, and I think it kind of just, we have to get to the point of what Reverend Collins is asking. We need to know that we will not be opening schools with staff that feel they have been forced into the building when they did not want to be there.
We would like all of our staff to report to the school, even if they're teaching virtually, if they have a classroom to themselves. Because as you can see, there's a lot of modification that has to be made for a few days.
Let me rephrase. We want to make sure that we're not having teachers forced into in-person classrooms. Every person at the table and elsewhere works in an office. I work in an office that no one comes into, and so we get that part. I'm talking instructional, that we don't have teachers who are being forced to go teach classes because they don't feel comfortable being in the building teaching a student in person, but we're demanding that they do that in order to maintain their job.
That's exactly the position we want to start with.
Is
We-
that they will not be in there if they are not comfortable
We-
being in there.
We would not want to force teachers to come teach in person in situations that they are not comfortable with when our infection rate is what it is. So we want people to know what the infection rate is, understand what we're doing. We want compliance to be 100% with the safety precautions, and then each can make the decision that's best for him or her with respect to working directly with children
Thank
at
you.
this time. Now, when the rates get lower, we'll be in a different situation.
And I think, and it goes back to the question asked, is that everybody has an opinion of what you just said when you said the word lower, and none of us know if the other person's thinking the same thing. We're going to have to quantify some of that at some point.
When we get inside the DHEC recommended guidelines, at that point, we need people to come to work.
When we're inside the DHEC recommended guidelines.
Yes, ma'am. And until then, we think it's safe to operate. We intend to be out in schools ourselves. We hope we'll be able to start every day in a school. All of us who are sitting here.
So you said earlier, DHEC has a recommended rate for full population. Does DHEC have a recommended rate for partial population?
They do. For example, the 2-week incident rate, they would consider anything over 200 incidents per 100,000 to be high, and would recommend that you proceed with caution. Now, some districts are using those recommendations as the guidelines that they will follow to decide whether to open for anyone or not.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, then we've got a motion and a second on the table going around the horn. Reverend Mack, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mrs. Coates?
Yes.
Reverend Collins?
I just want to make sure I understand what I'm voting for. So are we saying that the capacity will be 25% and the discretion will be within the 25%, or the schools be allowed to do whatever amount they want to do?
So staff will be given the flexibility on in-person instruction based on the school capacity and also the number of that request it in person, and we can do it very safely. So one school may be able to do 35%, and another school may only be able to do 20%. But the flexibility is there to allow it to happen.
Okay, I think that's kind of dangerous waters to trade upon. I'm going to vote no, but I think the 25% is a minimum safety standard, minimum.
All right.
So my vote is no.
Ms. Darby, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Aye.
I vote yes. Mrs. Green, are you on?
And Priscilla.
I am.
All right. Okay, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Ms. Jeffrey?
Yes.
Okay, the next item on is the learning service instructional update.
So as Maggie works to get the slides up from our part of the presentation, first of all, I want to say, one of the gifts of being a new member of the Charleston community is the diversity of our community. So there is a wide range of parent vision for how this should actually go about. And I think we're at the point right now where we have to plan an instructional program, and I want to make sure that it's most high bar for rigor and it continuity. And I think one of the challenges of the ambiguity that we just discussed is we don't want folks jumping back and forth into multiple programs, because that's going to lead to confusion around the content area, a lot of catch up and remediation. And we really need to accelerate instruction and make sure we're taking more than a year's worth of growth in the year. So in learning services, the way that we've been thinking about this throughout all of our work is there are 4 big priorities in order. First is the health and safety of our students, their families, and the teachers. So that means when we're teaching, yes, we will stop and say you need to correct the mask. We will remind students that they need to be 6 feet apart, reinforce the health and safety protocols, because that's very important to make sure that we're learning that. And it's going to take us as adults a little while to get used to that as well. The second thing is equity. Like, we're not going to be able to do this for all families right now. We're going to have to make sure that we're thinking about what's the right distribution of need and making sure that we're really considering parent choice and where the parent perspective is on what they think is right for their families, and teacher choice and what's right for them. Third is well-being and making sure that we're really thinking about, I think this has been a traumatic time, certainly for all of us. Obviously, people have lost some loved ones due to the illness. Some people have sickness in their family. Many of us have suffered economic hardship. And then there's this larger conversation around dismantling systemic racism here in the county and across the country. That's a lot to process. Don't process it in productive ways in the classroom. It's going to come out in unproductive ways later on. So we need to make space in the environment of our communities to build relationships and to create that energy around care for adults and for kids. And then last, because is in my title, it's very important to me, is we got to accelerate academics. We've got to cover more than a year's worth of growth. I want us to get to that fourth one, but we're not going to get there unless we achieve the other three. The anxiety level, if it's too high around health and safety, people aren't going to be able to focus. Adults are comfortable in the classroom. So we generally have to take it down a notch. As I'm looking across the nation around states that have effectively reopened, it's a slow and steady approach to that. And that's the way we're thinking about this, so we can also offer a consistent academic program. So specifically what I mean is I'm asking all schools to prepare for a temporary remote instruction with the child's teachers for at least the first quarter for elementary schools, first quarter for middle schools. For high schools, we'll have them prepare at least a semester. At that will also allow us, because one that this board has said from the very beginning, and also that our principals have said from the very beginning, is that we want to bring back as many students as we absolutely can in person safely. So that's a huge priority for us. But we want to make sure that it's based on parent interest and care, that they think they're ready for their family. And I think one of the things we've seen at this board table is the definition of safe is hard to tell right now. So the best person to make that judgment is the person who knows their child. And so they should make that. And we will bring back children on September 8th for face-to-face instruction as much as we can within the confines of the building capacity and the number of teachers who are willing to do in-person instruction. For those who are not at that place, or if we have more parents who are interested in that than we have available seats, which we're not sure, honestly, because 40% of our parents didn't respond to the survey. And we do think there's some ambiguity about whether folks are comfortable coming back 5 days a week or something else. And essentially, we're going to offer a 5-day-a-week option for in-person out of the gate. And then we're going to offer temporary remote instruction with local teachers, because for us, it's better instructionally to schedule the programming that way. We can offer more electives if it's a closed high school community. And then my hope is, over the course of the first quarter, over the course of the first semester, we'll start to learn the procedures, we'll see them work, teachers will get more comfortable, families will get more comfortable, and principals can have the discretion to bring back more classes of students and more in-person conversations, and more kids will come back to in-person as is right for them. Now, we know there's a subset of people in our community who know now want to send their children back for any in-person instruction for a variety of reasons, that there's medical vulnerable folks in their family, it was working for their kids and keep that up. And for those, we have the virtual academy option, which would be a year-long option of fully remote. Because we want to make sure that we have some flexibility, if we're seeing the virus levels in a particular place at the end of the quarter and this board feels comfortable saying we can have more students come back in person, parents at that point who are not comfortable can transfer their children into virtual academy. Obviously, that would be true at the end of the second semester. If we have a majority of parents who are still not comfortable, we can, if we have to, extend temporary remote as a further option. My hope is we're offering less courses in that format based on parents' comfort. So that's our framework on this, because it is very much a partnership with teachers and with parents, where we all have to, in the same way we're wearing masks right now, send a clear message that I look out for you, you look out for me. You need to see it yourself, you need to see how to do it. And then we need to increase our efficiency over time. So that's how we're thinking about framing this work. What we want to do in the rest of this presentation, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues and folks who lead the school on the ground to paint a picture of what we think the schedules are going to be like instructionally and the different modes in which we're presenting. We're also going to talk through some of the things that we're doing around professional development for in-person as well as virtual instruction, given students may move from different groups over the course of the year. And then we'll obviously also on the academic calendar. Ms. Simmons?
Thank you.
Maggie, if you could proceed with the slides. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. As just mentioned by our CAO, we do expect to begin the school year offering two modes. That's in-person instruction, that's traditional in-person, or what we're calling a temporary remote model. Traditionally, teachers adhere to a defined amount of minutes per subject each day. That will continue to be the case this fall. If we find ourselves in a remote environment, we want that same level of structure and routines for our boys and girls. The sample remote at home schedules provided today for grades pre through 12 all take into consideration the amount of time and manner in which a student would be provided direct instruction. Notice that there are specified times allocated for direct instruction, independent practice, and support for each schedule. For example, if a student typically received about 60 to 80 minutes of literacy instruction every day in person, during remote instruction, they may have about 60 minutes of direct live instruction with a teacher, then 30 minutes of instruction in terms of independent practice in Canvas or through another reinforcement opportunity. We aim to provide a remote experience that allows for live, direct instructional time that is structured and scheduled, as well as consistent across our system. So the sample schedules here are to provide more collaboration and conversation among the teachers and scholars, but they also account for school discretion, which will allow for differences in sequencing and approximate times. Notice I said approximately or about 60 minutes. This is going to allow our teachers to monitor and adjust based on needs and circumstances. Now, Dr. Williams will give more detail about the schedules. After we disinfect the area.
All righty, so great day, everyone. It's so good to see you all. Many of you in person. That was a ha-ha. You all should laugh at that. No one laughed? No one got that? Never mind. Well, so great to see you all in person, finally. So while Ms. Simmons kind of went over, or gave an overview of the two modes we'll be utilizing once school starts, I want to delve a little bit deeper into the schedules we're going to provide to support these models. So as stated earlier, the remote learning schedules take into consideration based on our experiences in the spring. We needed a balance between that live remote instruction and that independent practice that's critical to reinforce skills with scholars. So in essence, what you'll see in our schedules is more time for remote learning, live remote learning, and also you see more time for independent learning in these. What we're trying to do in these schedules is to make sure that we closely mirror the time required by the state for in-person learning. So that's what you see in these schedules. I'm going to go over that in just a minute. So we have been given some flexibility with these times, but not much, given that scholars need more instructional time overall to master grade level standards. So more specifically, in all of these PK through 8 sample schedules, what you're going to is number one, there's more time for in math versus all other content areas. And this is aligned to academic data, which shows the need for this. Now, this is what you would typically see as well with an in-person schedule, all right? So number two, what you're going to see with these samples is that in these schedules, there's slightly less time allocated for science and social studies. Again, need for more time allocated for ELA and math, which both again support academic growth in science and social studies as well. Number three, what you're going to see is there's live remote time allocated for related arts. That's your PE, your music and other courses, as well as time for independent practice in these areas. We recognize that scholars still need these experiences, even in a remote environment, to have a well-rounded schedule, which gives them time for exploration in these areas. So number four, you're going to see that in all of our schedules, there's time for social emotional learning, and we call that SEL. Because that scholars will and can be impacted by the current state of our community and our country. And finally, we've embedded time throughout the day for breaks, lunch, and movement. I'll repeat, yes, break, lunch, and movement, because we realize that these opportunities are needed, and then we encourage these in our normal in-person schedules as well to support overall health and wellness. So now for our high school schedules, we have taken into consideration that scholars have Carnegie units time that must be fulfilled for graduation purposes. So an example is for a 90-minute block class, a scholar will have about 60 minutes of remote live time and 30 minutes of independent work time. For a 45-minute class, and they call these skinnies, that's a little term I can teach you all today. These are shorter times, and they're usually a year long, and they will have about 30 minutes of live remote instruction time with these classes and 20 minutes of independent time. So that's a little bit over 45 minutes if you've done the math in your head, but they could use the additional time. So now we realize that with these schedules, you all, teachers will need some support implementing them. So what we've done is to support teachers with executing these remote schedules with confidence. I repeat, with confidence. We have a number of curricular and professional development and training opportunities, which include but are not limited to Canvas, which you've all heard a lot. That's our learning management system that we'll be utilizing. We also have Zern, which is a math program that many of our elementary schools will be utilizing. And we also have professional development on transitioning to a remote teaching environment, which is very important and critical, and also supporting the academic needs remotely. So we're thinking that with all these things that we put in place as far as the schedules and the support we're going to provide with teachers with implementing, that we will have a much successful remote experience when we start in the fall. And now I'll turn it over to Jennifer Coker.
Good afternoon, board. It's Jennifer Coker, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing as far as SEL and working with our students and families around crisis. So it's essential that we all understand the effects of a crisis on our brains. This picture is a representation of the various effects that crisis can have on students and staff. As we begin this fall, we need to acknowledge that our country and our community have lived through two crises, the pandemic as well as our social justice crisis. And living through crises can bring on anxiety, stress, phobias, depression, and panic. Understanding these potential effects allows us to plan better for our reopening. Maggie, if you can move forward. So to plan for that and prepare, we've set out some additional training for our administrators and our teachers. Over the past few weeks, we trained our administrators at our lead meeting at the end of July in cultural competency, implicit bias, as well as promoting and wellness through socially just practices and social emotional learning. And all admin or school administration were required to attend those sessions. We will also begin training on restorative practices again in mid-August. As we prepare for the teachers to return tomorrow, they as well will have cultural bias and cultural competency, implicit bias training, as well as an overview of social emotional learning. And then for each grade level, we have roadmaps on how to teach the required SEL lessons for the first 9 weeks of school. We also will offer trauma-informed educator training with our partner, Dean Norton Child Advocacy Center, as well as restorative practices, classroom management, and some other partners will be doing some additional training for teachers and staff. Finally, next slide, Maggie, we'd like to lay out what our student supports will look like as far as social emotional learning and teaching anti-racism. So obviously we need to do things for all students because safety practices that have been discussed are critical to students and families feeling safe. So that's our first level of support. We have our positive behavior systems of supports in our schools, and schools are working now on how to manage those systems in person and for students who are working remotely. We have social emotional learning embedding into our schedules, as Dr. Williams mentioned. And we've had a team of teachers, guidance counselors, school psychologists, and other district staff working on social emotional roadmaps anchored to our curriculum in grades 4K through 8. but also bringing in lessons on anti-racism and getting along with others who are different than us. And for our high schools, it's exciting because we haven't had a standardized curriculum for SEL. We've created a roadmap using overcoming obstacles as well as teaching tolerance lessons so that our high school teachers have a map for the first 9 weeks. Those roadmaps are laid out very specifically for the first 2 weeks of school and then for each week following. And we'll continue to build those roadmaps as we go throughout the year. And they will be for in-person, remote, or virtual learning. If students need additional support, of course, we have our school counselors who can do groups with them, our social workers, our schools to provide additional supports. We have explicit behavioral instruction in certain classrooms that can be offered virtually or in person, as well as our communities in schools counselors. And then finally, we're continuing our relationship with the Department of Mental Health, which we know served well over 1,500 students last year and will continue to be a presence in all of our schools, as well as our telemental health partnership with MUSC. Work through with our schools, their plans, their individual plans, all of these parts, components should be included, and we're supporting them as they begin with teachers tomorrow. Thank you.
All right, thank you. The next item up is the revised.
Sorry, there's just a couple more slides.
Go ahead.
Sorry, sir.
I have a question too.
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Belcher, and then we'll come to you.
We just wanted to give you a picture of some of the professional development we're providing for teachers on virtual instruction. Ms. Woody, are you good to go?
Sure. Glad to talk about. Dr. Williams mentioned this. We just wanted to show you all that we will be using the Canvas learning management system for all of our learners this year as a starting point. So we've also built out resources for teachers in Canvas. They'll be introduced to those this week to create many of these resources. And then he also mentioned that there will be some direct professional development opportunities. Maggie, if you could click on the next slide, that shows some of the opportunities, the courses he mentioned, transitioning to a remote teaching environment, the rubric for virtual instruction training, and also we are paying for teachers to earn their Google teacher certifications if they are inclined to do that. So those are just some of the examples of the over 120 PD sessions that are scheduled for the next week for teachers.
Right. I think the headline is we just want to make sure that we're taking a much more structured approach towards any remote option that exists so that parents can expect certain things happening consistently across the system.
Thank you very much.
Todd, just one question.
Go ahead. And then Reverend Collins, I'm going to go around with each item around the horn of in-person, then I'll come online to everybody. Ms. Darby, you got any question?
I do have a question. Just to clarify on something, when we talk about the capacity, and I think you said this, Ms. Belcher, when we talk about the capacity of the school, that doesn't necessarily, that means the building capacity, not necessarily that you have the teachers who are available to come back and do in person. I mean, I wanted to make sure that's clear.
That's right. I mean, the process would be to match up who are the families that want 5 days a week of instruction, who are the teachers who are willing to do small groups of instruction in person. Let's match those up. Obviously, it may not be nice and neat by grade level and content area, but to the best of our ability. And then the rest would go either temporary, remote, or obviously those people who opt for virtual academy.
So this is just a real quick statement. I don't know how anybody communicates this. I was looking for Erica, but as I listened to you guys in all these meetings, you're putting so much structure in place, which is wonderful. And as I look at the feedback that we're getting from parents that are on two opposite ends of the spectrum, if we can communicate, certainly, hopefully to our parents that we do all of this with grace and that they're going to have to be flexible. You know, they may want that particular teacher, but their child may have a couple of different teachers. I mean, I think you all are going above and beyond to provide what our students need and what parents want. parents are really going to have to be flexible this year. So I encourage us all to do that.
Yeah, I
to be
keep
more
saying it's an
flexible.
adaptive leadership challenge. We all are going to have to be
Exactly,
flexible. And I just would say that that is a good way to set the expectation. I think we will see different teachers over the arc of the year, but our focus will always be on trying to make sure that teacher has a relationship with the students that they work with.
Okay, thanks.
Reverend Mack?
Just one question. So is the remote training a PD for teachers or voluntary?
I'm sorry, can you say, I missed the beginning,
The
sir.
remote training that was just discussed, is that will be considered a PD, which means that teachers will be required to take it, or is it just a full week's session?
They can opt, the one training that is required as is a board is their culture of competency work, because I think we're working very hard to make sure we have a shared language around that. The rest they can opt into, but it's strongly encouraged that Canvas is our new program and not everyone is fluent in that, but they have a whole menu of options. Miss Woody, is it close to 120 or 140 different professional development options that they can customize based on where their learning edge is? Some people are quite sophisticated on the online tools and really want to focus on curriculum and making sure they've got the new math curriculum up and running. And so we also have trainings on that.
Okay, so it's a pathway for those that, as you just indicated, that may feel they need more training or strength in that area to better or to be more effective in remote, to where those that have already capitalized on doing remote teaching, that they can opt out to focus in other areas. Is that
That's
what you're
right.
saying?
Yeah, I think we're calling some of them Canvas ninjas or something like that across the field, that we've got some people who are very proficient already with that tool, and they're serving as contact people on site, but they wouldn't go through the same basic Canvas training as someone who's using it for the first time.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Frazier? Okay, go ahead, Dr. Wu.
We sent an email out to school leaders to notate that they had that leadership ability to, go to their staff and determine who were the Canvas ninjas versus those who were not. Since that training started this week, and that's probably like one of the number one priority things we need for all teachers.
But we can't hear him at all.
Access to is that Canvas piece.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Frazier?
Yeah, it's really not a question, just an observation. First, great job to try and adapt to what's a changing environment. And I think Ms. Darby framed it pretty well, that everybody's all over the place. I would suggest to you that it won't ever go back to what it was. So I think there's a lot we've got to learn here, because there's going to be some version of what we're doing now that we may be doing for a really long time. And so I hope we're taking an opportunity to figure out these things, to build a digital library, to build those kind of things, because I think it's something that's going to be with us for a while. So I hope we're not missing out on that learning. So
Appreciate that.
All right, Ms. Coate? No, okay, Reverend Collins?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I do want to echo some of the same concerns that Mr. Frazier just made. I think we are looking for the long haul and not a quick term solution to get kids back in school. We all would like that very much, but I can't say that's going to happen. The report a little while ago by Ms. Simmons and Dr. Williams, I may have missed it, but what would be the school close time? I think it start was 8 or 8:30. What would be the close time at the end of the day? The school would close out for the kids that are come to attend.
Mr. Burrow, do you want to address that?
It was I think it was Mr. Williams' report and the Simmons report.
Right, they're not at a microphone, and Mr. Burrow is.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
What was the question again, please?
Okay. Well, what time would school start in person, and what time would it be over at each school?
So as it stands right now, we're still working on busing options. It will all depend upon how many kids come back to school. I think the worst case scenario would be we would run double routes earlier, 20 to 30 minutes, and have double routes after that run 20 to 30 minutes. So the school day itself would stay roughly the same, but it would take us longer to get all kids to school. So a good rule of thumb would be 20, 30 minutes on the front, 20 to 30 minutes on the back. If it turns out that we've got less kids coming to school, it could be exactly the way it was, exactly what the bell schedule is now.
Okay. All right. For Mrs. Coker, what are we doing for the Turning Point Academy? Daniel Jenkins, and before you answer, make the statement. You and I both know the great challenge you have over there with discipline in both Turning Point and Jenkins Academy and Liberty Hill. You know, I mean, some of the students will hit the teachers and harm teachers and curse teachers out and won't obey. And is that school gonna be open full time, or and what safety protocols you're going to put in place? Because they're not going to just obey. They're not going to obey a simple voice. Put your mask on or sit down. I mean, you can't get that accomplished now. Not you personally can't get it accomplished, but they're not doing it now. They're not obeying now. So what are you going to do at those schools? Are you going to keep them closed, or what's going to?
Thank you.
Provide the answer.
Thank you for the question, Reverend Collins. Yes, all of our alternative schools will be opening this fall. It's typically we open in the fall with much lower numbers than we do by the spring. And so we will also follow all the safety guidelines in place for the district, as well as looking at our capacity numbers that Mr. Barowe's department has done. Our classes are normally never more than 12 students per class, so we will not be doing 12 people per class to the start. Our students also have the same options of remote or in-person as the other schools. So our schools are working on which students are opting for those various types of learning. And our teachers are developing with our administrators plans for exactly what you're talking about, how we manage students who are having difficulty following particularly safety procedures. And my department is actually working on that process for the entire district, not just the alternative programs. But we will follow all of the same capacity requirements and safety requirements that other schools are following, but with very low enrollment because it is fall for us.
I appreciate you following the safety guidelines and CDC and I even our very own CCSD. But to be realistic though, that's still going to be hard to enforce unless you have additional support staff, you have additional student concern specialists. I don't see how you could function successfully by putting so many kids at risk health-wise if you had the same old staff and the same amount of people working. I mean, because right now we have trouble keeping them safe. And,
well, at 25% capacity, we will have the same staff as we normally have, but with 25% of the students in the building. So that very staff you mentioned, the student concern specialists and teaching assistants, would not be involved so much in their remote learning, but the in-person part. And so with lower numbers, we actually have a higher ratio of adults to students with our support staff with the 25% capacity to begin.
Reverend, can we have you follow up directly with Superintendent Ms. Coker if there are further questions on those particular institutions?
I'll think about it, but you can move on to the next person.
All right, thank you. Ms. Okay, Ms. Jeffrey, and we'll come back to you, Ms. Green.
I don't have anything, Todd. Thanks.
Got it. All right, Ms. Jeffrey.
I don't have any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. And the next item up is the academic calendar.
Move approval.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion or questions on it? Okay, then go on.
What item are we voting on?
Reverend Collins, you're
3C.
now on, yeah.
3C, Reverend Collins.
The calendar? Let me see.
Calendar.
Okay. All right, the calendar. Okay. I just couldn't hear him. Okay.
Going down the list, Reverend Mack, how do you vote?
Yes.
Mrs. Coates,
Yes.
Reverend Collins,
No.
Ms. Darby?
Yes.
Mr. Frazier?
Aye.
I vote yes. Ms. Green?
Yes.
And Ms. Jeffrey?
Yes.
Okay. The next item up is just a review of the issues coming up on audit and finance that you had in your packet. Are there any questions on those? Okay, hearing none, the policy and personnel.
I'd move to approve the proposed policy, and I would be inclined to include that all visitors would be required to wear face masks when on campus or asked to leave if they don't comply.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second on item 4B. Is there any further discussion?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I have one too.
I saw in the motion, it talked about having folks asked to leave. Can't we just deny entrance? Which would be a whole lot better than having to have that conversation inside the building. We have secure buildings, we can just deny entrance.
Yes, that is an option. Sometimes the way that the school is set up, the parents may be able to get into the vestibule before they may come into contact with the first CCSD employee. And so that at that point, you may ask to leave.
Okay.
Plus, we can take them off.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, what questions do you have?
Yes, for the mask and the face covering policy. I'm gonna just use the high school student for example for this question. It said the students are allowed to remove the mask at meal times, outdoor recess, which I don't think high school has recess, and some maybe other from the school. So my question is, the kids are in classroom. If it's a full day of school, do the kids get a break during instruction time, or have a safe place they can go to get out of the mask for a little while, or do we expect them to keep it on the whole time, which would be about somewhere between 6 and 8 hours, with the exception of going to lunch, or younger kids going to recess? So that's going to be an expectation of this policy that the child must keep the mask on the entire day.
Ms. Ham, are you answering?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So that's a very good question, Reverend Collins. There are two things that I wanted to comment on before you got it. Under the student section where the bulleted points are,
Yeah.
We would like to add a bullet that indicates for an exception for planned distance mass breaks. And so that way the school can manage that and the classroom teacher can manage that appropriately. It's not something that we would manage at the district level, but something that the teacher would be able to appropriately manage. And additionally, we have some additional guidance with regards of the types of face masks that are appropriate. Ellen Nitz is actually online. I'm gonna punt it over to her to describe it to you, but I would like to include some language that limits the types of face masks that students are allowed.
And before you do that, can you answer this question? I agree with what you said, having the mask break. That's really what I was getting at. But the language don't have the language in yet. When you put the language in the policy that says that the schools are come up with some type of mask break, face mask break time, instead of leaving it the way it is, other specific here.
Call back for the second reading then?
Yeah,
Yes,
it'll
sir.
be in there for second.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
What other questions does anybody else have or further discussion?
There was something now just to hear about the
Okay.
actual coverage.
Go
Yes.
ahead.
Ellen, are you online?
I am online. Can everybody hear me?
Ma'am.
So with the mask coverings, what we want to make sure, we're getting a lot of questions from parents. We want to make sure that the mask is something that will cover the nose as well as over the chin, making sure that it's either got the ear loops or the ties. We want to stay away and make sure that we don't include such thing as the neck gaiters and the scarves and the bandanas, because what we have found through all of our different research, this stretchy material actually can still let a lot of the droplets come through. And so we want to make sure that we're providing the best coverage that we can have by having a face covering that stays close to the face.
So to be clear, the question has really been about the neck gaiters, and you're saying that we want to, now that's not allowed.
That's exactly right. And that medical professionals support that as well.
They do.
Okay.
Mr. Garrett,
yes.
I'm happy to have my motion slightly, as I stated, to have visitors wear face masks, and we would take additional language from staff to fill in these other blanks at second reading.
Yes, I'll update that language before you guys vote on it for first reading in a couple weeks.
Okay.
Second
reading.
Okay. Sorry, thank you.
Okay, here, no further discussion. We'll go around the horn back.
Yes.
Ms. Coates,
Yes.
Reverend Collins,
Yes.
Ms. Darby,
Yes.
Mr. Frazier,
Aye.
I vote yes. Ms. Green
Yes.
and Ms. Jeffrey.
Yes.
Okay, the next item up is our just upcoming meetings, which we've got a special meeting immediately following this. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I have one question
All right.
if we, while we're presenting actually, and let's go back to Ms. Belcher. So teachers will have the opportunity, like we talked about, in remote learning for remote teaching. Is there an opportunity for parents to, or is there a video or some type of canvas that will be constructed to show parents how to navigate through this remote learning arena as we approach? Because there are going to be some parents who's going to have the remote going on at home for their kids. So is there an opportunity for parents to understand how this is going? They can better understand the software so that we optimize on the learning instruction.
We still have work to do on that, honestly, sir, but that is a goal before we open, is to set up a parent site and to work with some of our community partners. One of the things we learned through the summer school program was how sometimes like basic technology access, Wi-Fi, how to turn on a computer, how to navigate through one portal, what to do if your internet spools away. Those kinds of things can really hold up virtual instruction. So the public libraries are interested in helping us on that kind of thing. Basically, we're working a lot with our social workers to talk about that, but that is something that still needs to be developed because I think we have a lot of work to do to make sure we're maximizing the knowledge among our entire community and how to really use these virtual tools fluently. And right now we're in the process with the state of making sure everyone can have some form of Wi-Fi access for next year.
Okay.
Move to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. And this closes the committee of the whole. Thank you.
Okay, I think we need to allow about a couple of minutes